So we're going to start right about now. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Folawe Omikunle, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Teach for Nigeria. Teach for Nigeria is a nonprofit organization working towards addressing educational inequity in Nigeria. We do this through a unique approach where we recruit outstanding leaders and place them to teach for 2 years in underserved schools, and then develop, support, train them to be successful teachers during those 2 years. But much more importantly is sort of igniting the energy in them to be leaders for the larger education ecosystem. So I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon, and I thank you all for joining us on this very important call. I'm going to send a special shout out and appreciation to our board members. Our board members at Teach for Nigeria make the work possible. And I think on the call we have the board chair, Mr. Gbenga Oyebode, if you can hear me, good afternoon. And Mrs. Alero Otobo, also, I think she's on the call, I'm not sure, but thank you so much for joining. And a special appreciation also to our ambassadors. All of these individuals make the work possible. Without them, there will be no Teach for Nigeria. And so to our incredible and supportive ambassadors, Catherine Bickersteth, I know Mrs. Bickersteth is on this call, and Mrs. Peterside as well. Thank you so much for your support, and to every other ambassador who might be on this call that I'm not seeing, I just say a big thank you. Also to the frontliners, the leaders and the change agents who make this work possible, to our fellows and our alumni who are on this call all the way in Kaduna, in Lagos here, and in Ogun State. Very well done to you all, and thank you for joining. And to our community of champions and all of you, thank you for joining. I'm extremely excited about this because we're going to be discussing a theme or a topic that is really dear to my heart. And then also, most importantly, because we're discussing a topic that is looking at today and the current crisis we're dealing with. This pandemic has thrown us into even deeper crisis, and we're going to be looking at the challenges that we're now facing as a result of COVID-19, as it has to do with education system in Africa and in Nigeria. But then much more importantly, we're going to be hearing solutions. We're going to be hearing about the implications. We're going to be discussing how to really forge ahead beyond COVID-19 now and beyond COVID-19. So thank you. The other thing that I wanted to say is when I think about the people who are on this call this afternoon and the group of speakers that we've lined up and put together, I'm just incredibly honored and humbled to have such amazing and superb leaders leaders and entrepreneurs who are going to be sharing with us from their wealth of knowledge, experience, and insight around what we could be doing, the challenges, sharing their challenges, and also telling us, what we could be doing in a time like this. So to all of you who are on this call, it is a privilege to tap into their wealth of knowledge. And I won't tell you any more right now. I'd like to invite our incredible alumnus, Henry Anumudu, who will be reading their brief citation. And then he will also be posting it in the chat box for those of you who want to see. And so Henry Anumudu, over to you.
My name is Henry Anumudu, and I'm an alum of Teach for Nigeria. Today, I'll be sharing a brief bio of each of our speakers. And I'm going to begin with Chris Bradford. Chris brings a hybrid background in business and education to his work of designing and building institutions of excellence. He is the CEO of African Leadership Academy, an institution that seeks to transform Africa by identifying, developing, and connecting future generations of leaders from across the continent. It's an honor to have Chris here on the call with us. Second, I'll talk about Dr. Modupe Adefesho. She is an education policy expert specializing in public-private partnerships in education. She's also the managing director of the Education Partnership Center and program director of the Learn Nigeria Citizen-led Assessment and Advocacy Program. Thank you, Dr. Mo, for joining us. Third is on our list is Mr. Fela Bank Olemo. He's a proven entrepreneur, leadership coach, pastor, and public servant. His track record of impact in more than 25 years of professional and social service is a testament to his belief that building people is the pathway to the greatness of our Commonwealth. Fela currently serves as the Senior Special Assistant to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria on education interventions. Before his current appointment, he served as the Special Advisor to the Governor on Education, Lagos State. We also have Simi Wogugu, the Executive Director of Junior Achievement Nigeria, an organization that has reached over 990,000 children in and out of school in all states in Nigeria. Some of the alumni of Junior Achievement Nigeria are successful business leaders and social entrepreneurs who volunteer their time and resources to ensure Junior Achievement Nigeria's sustainability. Thank you for joining us, Simi Wogugu. Then we have Martin Odebowale. He is a civil servant and fellow of Teach for Nigeria. Engaging in virtual exchanges, Martin fosters meaningful connections among teachers and learners. He recently led a team of teachers in Ogun State to record and broadcast mathematics, English, and science lessons to millions of children sitting at home during the pandemic. Next, Zingai Mutumbuka. Zingai Mutumbuka currently serves as a member of the governing board for UNESCO's International Institute for Educational Planning. He is the former chair of the Association for the Development of Education in Africa, which brings together all African education ministers and donors supporting education in Africa. He has served as the chairman of the Zimbabwe National Commission of UNESCO since Zimbabwe joined UNESCO in 1980. Before Zimbabwe's independence, Mr. Mutumbuka served as Minister of Education and Culture in Zimbabwe African National Union. You are welcome, Mr. Zingai Mutumbuka. Also, let's talk about Mrs. Ronke Shoyombo, the Special Advisor on Primary, Secondary, Technical, and Vocational Education to the Governor of Ogun State. Mrs. Ronke Shoyombo is a resourceful educationist, prolific writer, an accomplished business lawyer, and a Microsoft certified professional. Ronke displayed a first-class primary strategy teacher in Lambeth Borough, London. She was privileged to work as head of school in 2 schools in England and 1 in Nigeria. She has worked under Governor Raji Fashola and Governor Amode, and has improved the quality and standards of education in both states, guiding in coordinating and evaluating quality assurance process and supported services in schools to improve learning outcomes. You are welcome to this conversation, Ronke Shoyombo. And that's all I have for you.
Thank you very much, Henry. And just before I proceed to sharing the ground rules before we dive straight into this conversation today, I'd like to appreciate Wanga Yahunze, who is the head of Africa for Teach for All, and she's also joining us on this call. Thank you so much, Wanga, for joining this call. And so I'll share some ground rules. And the first one is to ask that everyone please mute your device once you join, and when someone is on the call and when someone is talking, please mute your device. We also ask that you introduce yourself and you say that your name and the name of your organization when the floor is open for questions. And we ask that you please make your questions brief, or your question brief, just to give a chance to everyone to engage and to interact, with this very important and vital conversation. Alternatively, you could drop your question in the chat box, and indicate who you're directing your question to. And you could also leave comments there while we're going. Also, we would love to keep this conversation going. And so we encourage that you please follow our social media pages, and would leave the handles in the chat box as well. We also encourage that you drop your social media handles so that we can all follow one another and remain connected to this work and the mission that we're doing. Thank you very much. And I'll now dive straight into the conversation. And before I start, I really just would like to share, I'd like to share something. And so this was 2 months ago. I remember I was on a panel that was being moderated by Dr. Modupe Adefeso. And at this panel, I remember Dr. Modupe sharing some statistics that were really disturbing. Not that it's new to me, but then I remember that February we're only just discussing these statistics again, and which starts with the one that is most popular, where everyone knows that 10.5 million to 13.2 million children of school age in Nigeria are out of school. That is almost 1 out of school children globally. Also at that meeting and during that panel, the data around 60% of primary school students who complete primary education in Nigeria are unable to read and write, whether in English language or in their native language. So that's 60%. Also during this meeting, I remember just someone again reflecting on the reality of Kaduna State as far back as 2017, when it hit us that 33,000 teachers sat for the primary 4 test. They were administered the competency test, and 21,780 teachers failed. Now, when you think about that, I mean, that in itself is a crisis. And then we look at today and look at even the deeper crisis that we found ourselves in. Just some days ago, I was reading that UNESCO has now said globally about 89% of school-age students and children are out of school. Now, when you think about that, Dr. Mo, I know that in your organization at the Education Partnership, you work a lot with data, you do a lot of research, you do monitoring and evaluation, you work with government bodies. And so I just really want you to help us sort of frame this conversation. Like, what is our current reality? Where are we really now with COVID-19? And so over to you, Dr. Mo.
Great, thank you, Folawe. It's wonderful to be on this webinar. And hello to everyone who's joined. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I think that this is an extremely important conversation to have. I particularly love the title, which is Rethinking Education in Africa. And I think that this is really important because, as most of us realize by now, this is certainly an unprecedented time, isn't it, Folawe? Children all over the world are learning at home. It doesn't matter what part of the world they're in, they are being forced to learn at home at this point in time. And obviously, a lot of attention has been turned to technology. In the last few weeks at TEP Center, we have been tracking the proliferation, if I can use that term, of education innovations, particularly within the context of Nigeria and across some parts of Africa as well. And there are so many new innovative technologies that are now targeting children. And the idea is to help them to learn at this time of crisis. So in terms of high tech, when we think about data-enabled solutions, I think it's always good to look at the data. And the data tells us that there is about 59% of people around the world have access to the internet today. And if we look at Africa as a context, about 39% of Africans have access to the internet. Now, I find that what's interesting about that data is when we look at Nigeria in particular, the data would suggest that 90% of Nigerians seemingly have access to the internet. Well, 90% of Nigerians have access to devices, and 61% have access to the internet. And it sounds really good, on the surface, except that we know that many of these devices are multiple devices that are owned by single individuals. We also know that the cost of data has dropped significantly in the last few months, but it still remains out of reach to most people in the country. I mean, this is a country where 50% of people currently live under the poverty line. And so we're really looking at a context in which the priority of people is really around finding what to eat at this point in time, staying healthy, staying alive, having a place to live. And it would seem as if high-tech data devices and learning online is something that is very, very out of reach of many Nigerians today. Now, when we look at the data, what also comes across to us is that there is a lot of data that we don't have. So we don't actually have accurate data, for example, on the accessibility of the internet and smart devices to children of school age. So we haven't got enough information to be able to disaggregate that data by school age. So when we think about providing internet-enabled devices or internet-enabled services, technologies, apps, approaches to young people to help them learn, we don't know how many of them have access to the internet specifically and how many of them have access to smart devices. I think for me, a big gap also remains digital literacy. And again, lack of accurate data on how many teachers understand how to use technology on the one hand and understand how to use technology to teach on another hand. Obviously, there's also a huge gap when we ask the question around, do parents even know how to support their children's learning? It would appear that anecdotally, the answer is very few parents understand pedagogy and the science of teaching, but we don't know what the numbers are. So at this point in time, we seem to have a melting point of challenges when it comes to even apprehending the issue from an evidence-based perspective. Now, prior to the pandemic, and I think Falawe has mentioned this, we knew that within this context, children were not doing very well in school. And data from the Learn Nigeria survey shows us that as at the time children are in grade 9, only 55% of them have developed the foundational skills in literacy that they should have acquired by the time they were leaving grade 2. And so children who are in GSS 3 or grade 9, I think about 45% of them, according to the Learn Nigeria data, do not even have foundational skills. For me, this is a major challenge. And as I'm reflecting on the situation that we find ourselves in today in the world, I am hoping that this pandemic creates an opportunity for us to flatten that particular learning curve, using a mix of both high and low technology solutions. And I'm really excited about the fact that states like Lagos and Ogun State and Kaduna and a few other states are leading the pack when it comes to the rolling out of low-tech solutions, radio school, television school, sending out paper packets to children. I think that in the short term, we need to see more of this. We need to get better at doing this, but we also have to think longer term. And how do we ensure that children have access to technology and meaningful access to technology? Falawe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mo. And, I like the fact that you shared, the issue around data, like where do we even start from without having credible data? And so, again, to your point around, we need to innovate around this during this crisis. We need to see this crisis as an opportunity to flatten the curve for educational inequity and inequality. And now this would take me to Papa, as I like to call him, Mr. Mutumbuka. And, I'm particularly interested in hearing what you have to say. And the reason is because I know that you served and led your education system right after, a time of crisis. Like you had just come out of the Rhodesian War in Zimbabwe. And so I wonder how you were able to achieve this. The reason also being that you're known to be the most successful and impactful minister for education in Africa. And so I'm just wondering, what was it that you did to have taken the education system from a place of crisis and to have been able to transform the system? And the second one is, are you seeing any examples of that on the continent? And if so, please share.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to this important discussion. Let me start with some general comments. I think that this pandemic has created severe challenges in both the economic and the health sectors. And we all know that when the economies are down, the first things that suffer are the social sectors, because the social sectors depend on tax receipts from economic activity. So one of the things that really worries me is, when will the economies get up? In the United States, for example, where I live, we have the highest unemployment in the history of this country. You just imagine what would, if that is happening in the first economy of the world, what is happening to poor countries in Africa, including Nigeria. So that's a really serious challenge that we face. The second challenge that we face is that there are many young people, young boys and girls who are out of school. But as the previous speaker said, those with means are likely to provide continuing education to their own children. What about the have-nots? What about the 13 million who will never go to school in Nigeria? What about the poorest of the poor? So one of the real worries that I've got is that this pandemic is going to exacerbate inequality. If we think yesterday was an unequal society, this pandemic is going to create phenomenal inequality in Africa. It further worries me that many of the young boys and girls who have dropped out of school, and we don't know when they'll ever go back, may actually never go back to school. And we ought to be thinking about those kind of challenges. So that, I would say, is briefly on the downside. What is the upside? And perhaps that's what Folau wants me to talk about. I think that challenges often provide opportunities for creativity and for innovation. Some of the successes we had in the early years of our independence were born by the fact that we were confronting humongous challenges. For example, every child, but we didn't have any laboratories in rural areas. So we created what we call Zim Science, which was basically a science kit that you could use an ordinary classroom and turn it into a laboratory. That was only created because we were facing enormous problems of resources. We were facing problems of how do you teach science when you don't have a conventional laboratory. Similarly, we were facing problems of teacher supply. How do you massively increase the number of teachers? So we went on a kind of apprenticeship program, which turned out to be actually a better way of training teachers for the whole country than the conventional system. So basically what I'm trying to say is that we should use this opportunity created by the pandemic in order to be as creative as possible, but bearing in mind that there are real risks that the poor are likely to suffer even much more than they did before the pandemic. With regards to Teach for Nigeria, since I'm on the board for Teach for All, I would like to make a shout for Teach for Nigeria, because I think Folau is doing an incredible good job. I think that our fellows really face challenges. And one of the suggestions I would make for them not to be isolated is really to create a community of practice, to stay in touch, to support each other. Secondly, I think this is an opportunity for Teach for Nigeria to go out of its way to the state governments and departments of education and ask the question, what can we do for you? We are here to support you. We know that children are out of school, but we know that tomorrow they may come back. What can we do in the meantime to prepare for when schools open? I think we need to go out of our way to try and be very helpful. I think alternative approaches to education, as we had before, are clearly the way to go. But I would suggest that the internet in Africa today might not be the low-hanging fruit. I think that we need to look to television and the interactive radio. When I was Minister of Education, we had what we called in Zimbabwe Radio 4, which was only dedicated to education. And we were able to achieve a lot through radio, because one teacher can teach thousands and thousands of kids. And I think that we need to look at these low-hanging fruits like television. Most people in Africa have access to television. Most people in Africa have access to cell phones. We need to try and use these devices in order to ensure that our children, particularly those from the lowest income groups, don't fall further behind. Because unless we do that, the inequality that we see today is going to be a lot worse tomorrow.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. And I was taking notes while you were saying, while you were sharing, and you mentioned something, and you mentioned this is a time for us to go out of our way to support government and ask them what we could do to help. And I know that, yes, there are fellows and there are alumni on this call who are all listening, but then I also recognize that there are other entrepreneurs, there are other leaders, business people, private sector individuals who are also on this call. And so what would their role be in also ensuring that we're able to flatten this curve and we're able to ensure that our children continue to learn? And so Papa, again to you, I just want to hear, like, yes, Teach for Nigeria does exist with its community of fellows and alumni, but so is the private sector, other leaders, and what role should they also be playing?
Okay. I think that education affects everybody. Again, when I was Minister of Education, one of the things that I did was to go out of my way to meet with the business community. For example, I regularly went to meet with business leaders and often asked the question, what kind of product do you want the education system to produce so that business can boom? This conversation is very important. And similarly, I would say to the private sector, we don't have enough resources to build all the schools, to supply all the equipment. Can you give a helping hand to government effort? And I even had an arrangement whereby big companies that were able to build big institutions like big secondary schools were able to declare part of their expenditure for tax forgiveness. And this helped a lot. We built several schools across the country simply by getting the business to participate in this. Nigeria is now the biggest economy in Africa. Nigeria is a booming economy, and Nigeria has a lot of resourcefulness. And I think that it is absolutely important for the business sector to stand up and be counted to say, look, this problem of COVID-19 is a national crisis, which is going to affect our pockets. It is going to affect the future of Nigeria. We have to look at it both from an economic, from a social, and certainly from a health perspective. But without people, Nigeria cannot be what Nigeria is. Nigeria is the biggest economy today, having overtaken South Africa because of its population. But raw people are like minerals in the ground. If they are not educated, if they are not skilled, if they are not trained, they just remain like raw diamonds in the ground. So I think it's very important that the business community, the government, and the communities work together to solve this problem. In our traditional African society, if you are living in your village, you tend to work well with other people. If a python were to enter your compound, what you are likely to say is, call your oldest child, go to my neighbors and tell them that a python has entered my compound. Can you please come and help? Depending on your relationship with them, they will rush to come and help. If your relationship was very bad with them, they will say, well, he never helps others. Let him battle the python alone. So I think we have this snake in our compound. I don't think alone we can beat the python, but combined together, putting our hands together, I think we will overcome.
Wow, wow, I love that so much and so powerful. We have a big snake in our compound and we can only defeat it by coming together to beat that snake. And so this takes me to our next speaker, Mr. Fela Bankolemo. In the fourth week of March, the federal government of Nigeria declared for all of schools across the country to be closed. And I know that immediately that happened, the government swept straight into active mode to ensure that they invested in the healthcare sector by setting up isolation centers and the testing centers. And also, I know that a few states started working on ensuring that their children continue to learn. I'd really like to hear from you, Mr. Bankolemo, exactly what the Nigerian government is thinking about this situation in ensuring that our children continue to learn. What are the interventions, whether short-term, mid-term, long-term? And is Nigeria looking at this as a short-term situation, or are we approaching this as potentially our new life? So over to you, Mr. Bankolemo.
We're all just trying to fully understand and know that whether we like it or not, it's going to be part of our life. I mean, it might not be COVID-19 next time, but it will be something else because of the way the world is. The first thing everybody tried to do, really, like you said, was close down the schools. And what we've done, I mean, across board, and you can see it from the states too, there are a lot of states that have activated learning on TV, on radio, on the internet. What the Ministry of Education has also done is we've just reached out to all the telcos, and in the next or so, we're going to have 2 websites where every Nigerian, regardless of wherever you are in the country, can access information on those sites, education information for everybody, whether you have data or not. So it's going to be a zero data site, so that's the key thing we're doing. That should be up and running by next week, across, so every Nigerian will have access to that. But the reality is this, that what we have now is unprecedented. The resources and the funds we're going to need to engage this is what everybody is looking at now. So the first thing we've done is how well can we get as many students as possible to continue to learn. And that you've seen, like I said earlier, about education on TV, on radio, on the internet. The new normal is that a lot of parents have to get actively involved in their children's education moving forward. You have to be actively involved. That's going to be a new normal for everybody. You have to help your children and ensure that you are involved on an active basis in helping them to learn. Now, post-coronavirus, when will the schools reopen? I mean, I was reading an article about Israel, and the Israelis were trying to say how quickly can they open schools. One clear thing for everybody's scared about the impact of opening schools and this thing coming back again. So really right now, we need to expand our interventions in the area of TV learning, radio learning, internet learning, then also create new plans on how to be engaged. The reality, we're going to need to raise a lot of funds. Technology is going to be a key of the future, something we have to want access to, you know. So as I said earlier, so right now that's what we're trying to engage. The focus now is a short-term intervention to get as many students learning as possible. Protocol on what we manage this post COVID-19.
Thank you very much. And I wonder if also just, you did say that everyone is scared about the reopening of schools just because of the fear of, the like further spreading. But, if you're to make an estimate around when, like by when, this goes, like people need to make decisions around exams, like they're trying to make decisions around school calendar. So there's a lot, on hold. And I'm just wondering if, from the federal government, there is any sense of when we could potentially reopen schools or we could, return to normalcy.
I mean, normalcy is something that it's going to be a new normalcy moving forward. Not normalcy like we used to know it. The reality is that we're watching the data and we're listening to our health officials give us to advise. Nobody can categorically say for sure now when we feel it is safe enough for us to send our children back to school. The reality is this: we can't afford for our medical facilities to be overrun. We can't afford as a nation. So we have to be very, very careful in managing things as we see it. Like I said, I mean, we're looking at different models. For example, in Israel, one of the things they were looking at is probably the new normal will be students coming to school for the first 4 days and staying out of school for the next 10 days. So if anything happens, the 10 days you are at home, you are like self-quarantine, then you can monitor those students. But everybody's looking at different models. So we're looking at that model and we're looking at seeing how can that work. But I speak to you now, we're looking at the medical guys have to give us a lot of them. Mr. President will speak to that later on. But as it is now, the key thing is how do we ensure that our students are learning as best as possible at home? TV, radio, internet, those are the models we're aggressively working in to ensure that most Nigerian students are learning.
Thank you. Now my question will go to Martins. And Martins is a Teach for Nigeria fellow who is currently teaching in Isale, Ijehun in Ogun State. And Martins, like if you listen to Mr. Bankole more, he did share that the only way to get our children learning now is really through this creative and innovative ways of, engaging them through television and radio. And I'm curious to learn about the community you're teaching and the percentage of children who actually have access to these devices, and also talk a bit about your experience so far with ensuring that your children are still learning during a time like this.
All right, good day all. Let me start from how it all started. On March 25th, specifically, the school had been closed, shut down, and up till this moment, our kids are at home the past 5 weeks now. That is the reality that is actually facing us And as it were, our kids are now at home doing nothing. The teachers are as well missing the interaction they are having with their kids. The bond that we've built so far is there. Kids miss their peers. The excitement and the joy that they experience in school is no more there. I just want us to feel the pulse of these kids. They are helpless now. Because looking at my community, for example, the NUD primary school is a low-income community school. Most of the parents are even facing the problem of fending for their kids at home, for their children at home, because school actually is like schooling, where they just push the children to, where they enjoy the federal government feeding program and the like. But then we have to come out of all the and try to find solution one way or the other to, no matter what. As a teacher leader, there are some things we have to do. But then with the support of the state government, virtually a week after the school was shut down temporarily, there was a total lockdown. And so within that week, fortunately, we have the government rising up the situation through the initiative of the special advisor to the governor on education, who called 10 existing teachers as well of Nigeria collaborate, and within that very week, we are able to come up with a lesson session, a recorded lesson session, which, as I speak to you, is being relayed, aired on OGTV, Ogun State Television, as I speak to you. So, but besides that, I think looking at the population of our children in school, we have like 435. Looking at the background, their parents actually, most of them do not even have a tech device, as it were. They don't have a smartphone. They just depend on the normal phone that they have with them. Apart from that, most of them cannot acclimatize themselves to the internet as we speak. I'm thinking even television broadcast is not even enough for these children. The best thing that I think we can still add to it is that of radio broadcasts, which I believe, as all the stakeholders of education can hear me now, in order for us to ease this tension and the shock of this COVID-19 that we are facing in our various schools, and in order for us to bridge the gap again, so that even as we lock up our classrooms, we don't lose the connections that we have with these kids, so that they too will be able to connect with their teachers. They'll be able to connect with their learning, and academic deprivation that we are facing right now will be a thing of the past. I had been to my school this morning. I see the community started. I had to call one of my kids around to help us plan some things in our school. There are some of them that I have actually engaged in some SDG program before the school went shut down, and I pull a call through to their parents in order for them to continue the projects that they're doing, most especially the tackle zero hunger, and is already on it. And some of them, I asked them to start planting trees in their various localities so that we can get out of global warming threatening us. So all these connections are the things that we had to continue to build with the assistance of the stakeholders of education. So I think, just like Papa Zinga said, I think we have to collaborate. We cannot do this all alone. We have to come together go back to the drawing board and look at how we can reach out to every child in Nigeria. Because as we are talking, as we are saying this, we already have the problem of equity in education. And we had to solve it right now, there and then. Because the challenges that we're facing now, we have to look at it holistically. Not that certain group or certain set of children will be benefiting from what we want to win. We want all of them to be engaged. And how do we do this? Let us make sure that through our the Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria, the network services that we have there, as they continue to transmit into all of the states, and every state connects to that center place where they can listen to whatever learning that we have for them there, they will be able to link up to that. Because radio broadcasts is, I think, the most economic station that they can have access to. Is the most economic one. Even with their small radio, they can actually put battery when there is no light for them to have access to education. And apart from that, you have to work together with these parents. I can see some responses here where people are saying parents are illiterate. Despite that, I think we need to talk.
Thank you, Martin. I'll just pause you there, and then I'll invite you again.
Let them understand that this is not what we can do alone.
Thank you very much, Martin.
They have to not achieve this. Parents are there. The teachers are just here at their respective places, supporting them with information that they can use to take care of those children. So parents are to sit with their kids whenever they are listening to whatever let's broadcast on radio.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. I'll come back to you later on, but I just want to go now to Mrs. Shoyomban. Thank you so much for sharing the work that you're currently doing on TV and your ideas around radio. You know, there's a question that has been coming up here, and the question is from Ibukun. And she's wondering, how do we measure that indeed our children are learning? How do we measure the impact and the effectiveness of the TV and radio learning? Now, to you, Mrs. Shoyombo, you literally in less than a month rolled out the television and the radio program, all that is happening within Ogun State. Can you share a bit more about, you know, this strategy? And can you tell us a bit more also about how you intend to measure the impact of this learning that is taking place in Ogun State?
Be on Teach for Nigeria's webinar. I really thank you for inviting me. Now, the key thing is COVID-19. When it started, because as a leader, you must be able to take immediate action. And also something I want to emphasize is who are those people that are very, very close to you? Because we were in a dilemma as soon as His Excellency announced that everybody was actually going on break. And I remember calling you, Folawe. We shared ideas and everything. And quickly we set up we set the ball rolling. So with that, the key thing is taking a decisive action as a state government to stay at home. But at the same time, children should still be able to learn from home. And with what we have set up in Ogun State, it's teaching all Ogun State learners from home during COVID-19 break. And when I say all Ogun State learners, you will see that what we have catered for under the STV 260 is between 9 and 10 o'clock. We have a lot of teaching going on for our children in primary schools and also in junior secondary schools. Between 10 and 11, we have the ones for secondary schools and senior secondary schools. So, and this is also what we have done is also because we, as a state government, we are not concentrating just on public school children, because you will see that in the Southwest, we have quite a lot of private schools as well. So all child must be catered for at all times. So with that, you will see the standard of teaching that we have actually showed through the use of interactive whiteboards, through the use of resources. And what we did was to get, to quickly call for teachers that have been trained really well to showcase, because it's not just teaching the children, but it's also an opportunity to teach some teachers how to teach better in classes, to further expose them to how teachers can teach with good resources. And not only that, what we have done as a state is also the fact that we have a website now where if you have missed our lessons in the last 4 weeks, you can still download, people can still access through website, because quite a lot of children, maybe because mom is not in, or there's nobody, or maybe there was no light at that particular time. When light comes, people can still access our website to download all the things that we have done. However, initially when we started, and I love the question given by Folawe, that how do we understand that there's good learning going on? On our website, there is an opportunity for people to feedback. And also, I try to follow my own governor on his Twitter account. And with that, you can easily follow a lot of messages. Initially, when we started, a lot of people had their backs up. Oh, we don't have light. There's no electricity. As a state government, what did we do in Ogun State? We tried as much as possible between 9 and 2 o'clock when our programs are running to ensure that we have light. Even though we still have about 2 or 3 local governments that we're struggling with. But for that, I'll be talking on that with step 2, because we got feedback from parents. We gave assignments to children. They were also sending their assignments back to us. So there was two-way communication going on our website. Also through television, OGTV as well. We had a lot of responses through that as well. Now, the key thing we want to do now is we should be going to step 2 now. That what do we need to do? We should be looking to alternative energy source, because we've got a solar panel. There's a lot of plans with our state government at the moment to see that the rural areas are being catered for particularly, and that's why there's a big synergy with the leadership in Ogun State. And that's something that we're using to seriously see how we can close our gaps. Because whether we like it or not, we still have few areas where they're not getting connected. And another great thing that we did when we started was we got in touch with all the ballets. And the ballets, some of them had television screen where what we were emphasizing was don't make them to be more than 20. But children were actually accessing television, and a lot of them were looking forward to it. Then we had some parents that complained that, oh, maybe children are not engaging after half an hour. I told them, I said, if they're not engaging, what you can do is come back again, because that's why we repeated our program between 1 and 2 o'clock. So that's to tell you that we are responding to the needs of our parents. And as the state government, the key thing is we all have to be very, very proactive and not just to be reactive, because this COVID-19 has seriously opened everybody's eyes, I must say. And going into step 2 now, I will say what has happened. When schools come back, post-COVID-19, we're likely to have influx of children seeking admission to public schools, because quite a lot of them might not be able to afford private schools again. Bearing the fact that parents have not been working, particularly those daily paid parents, and with that, we have to cater for them as well. Then another thing is, post-COVID-19, we have to be thinking of how sanitation, because there's no way everything would have been cleared, even when the schools are opened. So the real assurance will be, what are we preparing for? As a state government, we're preparing to make sure there is water in all the schools. Sanitation is being looked into, because there are schools where there are no toilets at all. And if we open up schools, we're likely to actually get infections and everything going on as quickly as possible. So to me, those are very vital things that we really need to look into before we open schools, really. And also ensuring that funding is available. Then the other thing is on the teaching and learning side, when we open the schools for step 2, there's going to be a lot of children that would have missed out. So there must be opportunity for interventions to be given to those children to close the gaps. So what we're doing is, how do we work with our teachers in identifying the gaps, and how we can quickly do a lot of intervention, maybe extra lessons to be able to close the gaps? Because even though I know people have accessed us, Even other states have been accessing Ogun State with what we are doing. But at the same time, we still have that 20 to 30% children that would not have been able to access it at all. But I like what you have mentioned today, Martins, because I mean, we're definitely, we're negotiating at the moment on how to also engage radio stations, which by the end of today, we should be able to finalize. Then another thing that we thought about as a state government is there must be defense training, because it's a critical goal. How do we defend ourselves from not going into COVID-19 again? Enforcing the washing of hands. A lot of things have happened. We have to make sure that we enforce that. Water in all our schools, as I've said, sanitation. And also we have seen that use of ICT, I mean, everybody has been speaking about it, so I don't want to repeat that, but use of ICT is a core thing that every state has got to take to be very, very important now, and also even for our teachers to be IT savvy. Then don't forget that we're going to have few children that might have been bereaved as well. We need to make provision for those children. Maybe dad died with COVID-19, mom died, because whether we like it or not, we've got to safeguard our children. So that's something that we are planning for as a state, that how do we cater for those children that might have gone through a lot of trauma. So there must be post-trauma care for all our students in our schools where they are affected. Then the other thing, I mean, the last but not the least, is how do we sustain the good learning, using good resources to support teaching and learning in all our schools? Because for Africa as a whole, for Nigeria, it's high time that we actually look into how we can give good lessons to our children and how everybody can access it, how we can benchmark our students with all this. Because whether we like it or not, with what people have been watching, we've had lots of feedback. It has fed the children from private schools. It has conveniently fed the children from public schools. So how do we sustain that? And how do we roll that out to make sure that standard is maintained with all the teachers when they come back to school? So those are things that will be a long term that we need to work on, and creating a more robust scheme of work that also would be online, so that everybody can access, and creating an enabling environment for private partners. Because with all the things that we're mentioning today, you will see that there's a lot of opportunities for private partners, because we cannot do it by ourselves at all as a state government. There's a lot we can do. We can review and revamp the curriculum, particularly because there are great practices going on in some public schools, but at the same time, there are wonderful practices going on in some private schools. How do we actually share? And I love what our father from Zimbabwe said, that you have a snake and everybody should join hands to kill it. So there must be collaborations, and there must be good collaboration between all stakeholders. We need all our parents. COVID-19 has really been helpful to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Shoyombo, and incredible work that you're doing in Ogun State. And from what I gather, you're working on short-term plans, but you're also preparing for long-term and what happens even after COVID-19. Thank you very much for sharing. But there are lots of questions that I'm going to be asking from our guest that has been coming on here. But then now I'd like to move on to Simiwu Gugu. And somebody dropped a question in the chat box, and the question here says that I work in the promotion of technical and skills education, and it is more practical teaching basic or universal education on television. What happens to the vocational education and students who need hands-on technical training vis-a-vis the theoretical teaching? How can we ensure that they don't miss out on this? And I know that Junior Achievement does a lot of work around empowerment of students and around financial literacy and all of these other skills that are required to equip and support our students. And I'd just love to hear from you, like, how are we really going to navigate this to ensure that our children are well educated and well equipped?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Shoyombo, it's to see me.
Sorry. I thought it was a question.
Thank you very much, Folawe, and it's really great to be here. I've heard a lot of important things today, and I think that question is very key. I think I'm going to come back a little bit to just what COVID-19 has shown us. It's really obvious that we need to be innovative. We need to be developing citizens who are able to be quick thinking, problem solvers, and are design thinkers. So when I think about how it has sort of crippled our education system, because our schools are closed, there are, a lot of people are saying, oh, we need ed tech, online learning. When you think about the average home in Nigeria, even if they have a computer in the house, because we've been talking about data a lot, let's think about they have a computer in the house. The parents probably need the computer for work because they are working from home.
Yeah.
They don't want their children to spoil this computer because this is what they're using. So the likelihood that they're probably going to even allow the child to be using it for education is very slim. And then if they do allow the child, the likelihood that the average child actually even knows what to do, how to get online, to access online learning is very slim. So I'm glad that we've talked about radio, we've talked about TV. I want to even take it back to before COVID-19, and we talk about education in Africa and education in Nigeria. To what end? At Junior Achievement, we deal with a lot of young people who are disillusioned about education. You go into their classrooms and we try to talk to them about the importance of education, and some of them will tell you, look at the Agbero, he's holding cash in his hands as a conductor of a car, and then look at the graduate who's holding a CV and is pounding the pavement looking for work. So what is my motivation to stay in school and just earn an education that I end up carrying my CV all over the place looking for work? I don't have a job when I can just go drop out, become a conductor, and have cash in hand every day. And that all, we get questions like that from our students all the time. The millennials and the younger generation, they're looking for direct results. Education to what end? ICT to what end? Like, what would it get for me? And how am I going to survive? And so Junior Achievement, we really focus on empowering people with skills for their future, skills that they can use to actually make money while they are in school. So we're teaching them entrepreneurship education, workforce participation. We're teaching them how to innovate. So looking at problems within their communities, how can they develop solutions? So taking them through design thinking steps that, what is a solution that you can develop right now that will make you some money and that will also help your community? These are the things that will empower us for the future beyond COVID-19. So we need people who can quickly think about solutions. And so what we've been doing is we've been working with the Ministry for Youth and Sports to develop ways that we can get young people, whether they are in the NYSC, we go into the camps to teach them and then train them to go into school. So once they've been trained, they now go into schools to train young people on programs that are very hands-on. There are no textbooks. It's very hands-on learning, which get the students really excited about learning things with their hands, learning things with their brains that they can then use to create businesses. I'll give you an example. A group of girls in Abuja who were children of farmers, and their farm produce of their parents would be rotting away while, when they go to school in the city, they see the not so fresh, expensive farm produce being sold in the market. And they said, well, how can we develop a solution that would enable our parents to make money, enable us to make money? And they went through our design thinking processes and came up with an app and a website that allows them to sell their parents' produce online to various consumers at a much cheaper price than they can get in the market. They ended up signing up about 400 farmers within their community onto the website. They made about 14 million naira in sales, returned 11 million. These are public school students in Abaji in Abuja. Returned 11 million naira to the farmers, kept 3 million naira for themselves, paid all their delivery guys, all the people that helped them develop the technology about 1.5, and were able to keep 1.5 million naira to themselves. Now, those students, if they leave secondary school and are not able to get into university, they have tangible skills that they can use. And we know that, 1.5, 1.8 million students leave secondary school every year. Our universities can take only maybe 700,000. And so about over 1 million students are leaving and secondary school every year and are not able to get into university and are becoming a nuisance to society. If they're able to get this kind of education before they even leave school, they become problem solvers. They are the ones creating the problems. They are the ones hiring their fellow students. So I want us to go beyond the catchphrases of EdTech and education and online learning to really think about how do we innovate? How do we provide solutions for our students who are graduating and not be able to get jobs? How are they able to contribute to society? How are they able to even feed their families? How are they able to create jobs? And that's what Junior Achievement does. And I hope that we're able to come together with some solutions today. I've heard about collaboration. We are collaborating with many other organizations, including Teach for Nigeria. I think that it is time for us to think beyond the traditional, what we call education, and really think about hands-on learning and how it can be a problem-solving tool for our young people.
Thank you so much, Simi, for sharing. And, I'm latching on to you sharing about the National Youth Service Corps and how you're engaging them. So it's making me think that there's definitely a role, it's a huge role for our young youth, for our young graduates and for our young professionals to play here and our young leaders. And now this takes me to Chris Bradford. And Chris, I've been following the work of Africa Leadership for a while now, and I know that you've been in this work for about 12 years now. And I know that your mission really is about developing a critical mass of leaders for the continent. Yesterday, I received your newsletter that was talking about, how you're navigating this current crisis and forging ahead. And you said something, and you said it was important for us to begin with the mission as we address and engage with this crisis. You said, what is our mission and how do we live into this mission? And you mentioned that our actions in a time of crisis must reflect this mission, and we must consider the implications of our decisions on the communities we serve across Africa. Chris, I'm very curious to learn about what these examples are and how our young leaders who have now been developed over the past 12 years are now living into this mission in a time like this.
Thank you, Falawe. It's a privilege to be here and to see my former colleague Simi is also particularly exciting for me. So you asked the question, how do we lean into mission in this time? How do our actions reflect this mission? And I thought maybe I should just start with a quick story of something that's happening on our campus right now that I find particularly inspiring, which is that one of our current students, she's 18 years old, she's a filmmaker. And she had an idea, what can I do to support peace and prosperity in Africa in the time of COVID-19? I'm a student, I'm stuck on my campus, living in a dorm where I'm socially distanced and taking classes online. But what I do have is I have a skill in film making and film editing. And so she reached out to her entire network and she's collected students who speak 50 plus African languages, to which they cannot find online WHO information about COVID-19 or thoughts on hand washing that has actually been translated into those languages. And they've turned that into a series of films that will allow, that can be distributed over WhatsApp and help local communities actually understand the risks of the coronavirus and how their behaviors can prevent the transmission of the virus. So that's not a explicit education action, you might say, per se, except it is, right? It's living a mission which is about enabling peace and prosperity in Africa. And it's activating my role as a young person, as an 18-year-old who has access to information, in becoming an educator of others in my community who might not be able to access the same information. And I just thought that was an exceptionally inspiring action to be taken by a student who's, you know, a few years younger perhaps than the average Teach for Nigeria core member. I think about two things that I think all of us can do as educators in this particular time as we think about supporting students and supporting schools that are probably worth talking about. One is, how do we design solutions with empathy? Right, so many of us are teachers who are trying to figure out how to keep our students engaged in a time in which they are now stuck at home and they're locked down, and they might not have any connectivity, and they might have gone home to a village. And one of the things that that I have realized as I've spoken with young people who run schools or who work in schools is that those who are having the greatest impact are actually sitting back and thinking, how has the day of my child changed now that they're at home? What chores do they have to do in the morning? What expectations do their families have? How can I actually reach them when they're most ready to learn? What resources do they have around them? So for example, could one of their siblings who's in the house or one of their parents serve as my partner as a teacher in educating them? And how can I connect with that person about what they might do as part of their education? And what I have discovered is that those teachers and founders have been particularly effective. They have actually identified ways. I think about a young woman named Deborah Alungi. She's identified in her community in the DRC, in the school she serves, she's a 23-year-old school founder, who in each home is the best partner to the school in educating the school children. And when is the best time to reach them? And how do we make the work that they can do with the children in our school bite-sized such that we can do it each day? And it's an amazing example of designing with empathy and meeting people where they are, rather than trying to implement a one-size-fits-all solution for families that are in very different places in this crisis. The other thing that I have seen and would like to encourage all of us to do is leaning into the new possibilities that this coronavirus situation might create for all of us to serve our students better. And that might seem counterintuitive in a time when our children aren't at school. But to use the example of Deborah again, I think about how her work with her students is actually going to strengthen the after-school support structure for these students who are going to school in an urban slum outside of Kinshasa every single day, long after the coronavirus pandemic has passed. Because she has learned how to work with families remotely and how to ask them to support their students' learning, right? It is creating new possibilities for how those families will continue to support student learning long after the pandemic has passed. For those of us who are going online, I see a few exciting possibilities. One is what I call tasting excellence. For the first time, all of the teachers can watch together an excellent lesson done by one of their peers. And they're able to have a conversation about what makes that lesson excellent, and have and really hone everyone's understanding of what an excellent lesson looks like. They're also able, for the first time, to perhaps watch lessons delivered by great teachers at other schools to see what excellence looks like in those settings. So one of the things we're trying to do at ALA right now is figure out how can we watch great lessons delivered by great teachers in places like Singapore, or in fancy boarding schools in Britain, or in very, very innovative technology-enabled schools in Silicon Valley, such that we can all taste excellence together and think about how we'll innovate our teaching practice. And I think that these are really exciting projects that any of us could take on. If we have access to be on a webinar like this one, we probably have the opportunity to actually connect to the world and discover best practices in education, and think about how we might bring those into our home communities, or what possibilities might exist for us. So that's where I'll stop for now until there might be some questions.
Thank you so much, Chris. And this is going to lead us right into asking our audience, to start asking their questions. And I already have one question from Gobi Daniel. Gobi, do you mind unmuting your microphone and asking your question? Please remember to introduce yourself, your name, organization, and indicate who you're asking your question to.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Falawe. My name is Gobi Daniel. A Teach for Nigeria fellow working in Kaduna State. And my question is to Mr. Bradford. Sir, since the official opening of the African Leadership Academy in 2008, there has never been a decline in the standard of education. So now my question is, what is the African Leadership Academy doing to ensure that students continue to learn? And then is there any plan to share the strategies with other educational institutions in Africa?
So these are great questions. So I'll break your question down into maybe 3 parts. So the first part is, how do you prevent standards from eroding in a school over a period of time, right? The second part is, how do you prevent those standards from eroding in a period in which you have immense disruption in student learning, as we do with COVID? And then finally, how do we think about sharing with others? So with respect to standards, I think that the most important thing that schools need to do is they need to build a culture of excellence that views excellence as something that is a reflection of continuous improvement and impossible to obtain. ALA does not measure excellence based on what our percentage of A stars or A's in a given school year on the A-level exams is. We measure excellence in the context of our mission, which is, how have we done in preparing leaders, both intellectually and with the skills of character that are required for success in university and beyond. And what that means is that we need to actually critically assess every year where we fell short in that regard, and how we might be able to improve our curriculum, the quality of the teaching in the classroom, or the expectations we set for our students, such that we deliver on that mission even better in the following year. And I think that too many schools in Africa think of excellence as a certain percentage of A's, rather than as a process of continuous improvement. And I think this is actually true for schools all over the world. And so I would encourage you, as you work in schools as Teach for Nigeria fellows, to think about how you are building, as leaders in those school communities, how you are building in that collective system the ability to reframe excellence as a process of continuous improvement, and recognize that even if 100% of the students in your class got A's on their WIAC exam, that doesn't mean that your class can't get better. Because once you instill that culture, it actually means that you respond to a challenge like the disruption of COVID, which is the second part of your question, with an expectation that you still must figure out how to get better, right? The expectation that we have at ALA today isn't that we will simply deliver what we can in our exams, it's that our students will actually perform better this year than they did last year. And we need to see what opportunities this new technology-driven Zoom teaching platform, which is what we have the privilege of using at ALA, offers us in order to improve our preparation for and delivery on our examinations and improve our preparation for and delivery on that mission that I described. So your final question is about sharing, right? And frankly, ALA can do a lot more to share curriculum and teaching methods with schools across Africa. And this is something that we'd like to be able to do. And it's actually something that I think things like this move to Zoom, which has happened as a result of COVID, allow us to do in ways that we could never do before. So we're actively actually recording classes right now. And we might be able to put some of those classes into the public domain for other schools. We also can share elements of our leadership and entrepreneurship framework with partners like Teach for Nigeria that we know hold similar values dear and seek to inspire the same types of collective leadership behaviors in the communities that they serve. How can we work together to actually build the quality of critical thinking, the strength of communication, the rigorous ethical problem solving in all of our schools that I think we've tried to build at ALA? And in that spirit of excellence, how can we learn from you and what you're doing in your schools to strengthen our curriculum at ALA and make the curriculum at ALA even better next year and years that follow than it has been in years up to now?
Thank you so much, Chris. And there are just loads of questions coming here, but there's one question that has been coming up. And again, it's this question around how are we really going to measure that our children are learning with reliance on radio and television? And I'd like to, it's directed to Dr. Modupe Adefeso, and I'd like to hear your thoughts, especially because you work in the research, data, and monitoring evaluation space. How can we really assess and check that our children are learning with this, through this method?
Very much for that question, Falawe, and to everyone who's asked a similar question. This actually is one of our priorities at TEP Center right now. We curate a community of knowledge and practice called the National Innovation Collaborative for Education. And so within that community are many innovators that work with different types of platforms, ranging from the very high-tech platforms to the more low-tech platforms. And what we have observed is that there have been many responses from innovators, from governments, from private citizens, to sort of fill the gap that is caused by school closures and our lack of, our uncertainty about when schools are going to come back in session. And so we're spending a little bit of time right now designing a survey. We have completed the design of it in partnership with the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, the NESG. And we are going to be administering that survey to governments, to different types of education innovators, to parents, to learners, to teachers, because we want to understand what is happening at this time. We not only want to understand the supply side of it, we also want to understand the demand side of it as well. And so to what degree are learners able to access learning through these mediums? What exactly are they learning? And get a sense of how effective this model is. As with many other responses during this crisis period, it's not going to be an extremely fancy methodological design as we would normally do. We do just want to get a sense. It offers us an opportunity to set the scene for a more robust evaluation of these interventions as we exit the COVID period.
Thank you so much for that information, Dr. Moore. And I think this is definitely something that all state governments should key into, especially the ones who are rolling out the different interventions. I'm going to ask one more question and then ask anyone who has questions to ask. We have a few minutes to go, but this question is directed at Mr. Bankole Moore. And it's with all of these brilliant ideas and innovation that states are embarking on. This person, Olumide Balogun, says one thing is missing, which is the issue of electricity. what is the plan by government to address this so that the online learning using TV and radio can actually be successful? Over to you, Mr. Bankolimo. Mr. Bankolimo, are you still there? Please unmute your microphone if you can hear me. Okay, I'm not sure he's in the room anymore, but I wonder if this is something that Mrs. Shoyombo could speak to, given that you're working in Ogun State and the electricity issue is a national issue. But I wonder if there's anything specifically that Ogun State might be doing to ensure that we have electricity provided for all communities in Ogun State during this type of period.
Thank you very much, Folawe. Ogun State, I said it before when I was doing my presentation, that what Ogun State is doing is to look at areas that don't have electricity. And what we're looking at is how can we have alternative resource to see how we can actually close the gap. Maybe the use of solar energy and other things, because I'm sure the special advisor on energy is actually looking into that. That's a target that he has been given as a state. So, from the state. So that's something that we're working towards. But also, the other thing is we're also looking at how we can use cash. Is CACHE, where if we can have the cash around some areas, some rural areas, people can still access the resources that we have in terms of what we have on our websites and so on. So that's something that we've also got the ICT department working on at the moment. But definitely there are measures to see how we can quickly support everybody on that as a state.
Thank you very much. Larry Ogundipe, please ask your question. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Larry Ogundipe, and I'm the CEO of Imperial Services. I just wanted to contribute a few things to some of the things that have been said. First of all, I want to thank everyone for their contributions. So we are coming from the EdTech perspective. We're an educational technology company, and we also have an OEM license, which means we're licensed to actually produce devices here locally in Nigeria. And we're currently engaging a few state governments in the north on some initiatives. So first of all, the device conversation, like we said, this is a collaborative effort that requires everybody to join hands to kill the snake. So we know about some organizations like the GPE and a few organizations who are sponsoring national frameworks. So we need to come together to put together a national framework. From the technology side of things, we have invested in putting something called a CDN here in Nigeria. A CDN is a content delivery network that helps to deliver content seamlessly across the country. It's a very, very good technology and very effective, but I can't start to share all of that. So we're looking also at homes rather than individuals. I think someone mentioned it. We're trying to drive data collection across homes. So if, for example, we have a tablet in every home, we're also looking at how we can schedule the timing. So maybe we do 8 a.m. to 12 noon for early learners within the home, and then maybe from 12 noon to 4 o'clock for like secondary school learners. That's another idea. And we also talked about the TV and radio. Those are good efforts, but measuring those efforts might be a problem. So what we're also doing is we're mapping individuals to teachers. So we're saying that, say, for example, a teach for Nigeria has 5,000 teachers or 10,000 teachers.
Larry, sorry, could you just be brief so that we can give everyone an opportunity to ask? I still have about 10 people who want to. Could you summarize real quickly?
Okay.
Yes.
All right. No, I'm not actually asking the question. I'm just coming to give like my own suggestion. So basically, all I'm trying to say is that we have some frameworks that we believe that we can share with everybody else here. You know, put together, you know, a good proposition and try to see how we can raise, you know, as much as possible funds, you know, to make these initiatives happen and make them sustainable as well.
Thank you very much. Please drop your website on the chat box just so that anyone who is interested could connect with you. There's a question here that a lot of people have been asking, and I'm going to direct this question to, it doesn't say who should answer, but it's really, you know, that they would appreciate if someone would speak to the issue of children in the most rural areas who have no access to technology, television, and even radio. How are we going to ensure that they're not left behind again? Please, who could answer that question? I guess it's been coming up and a lot of people are just asking. There's no TV, there's no technology, there's no electricity, there's no radio. And how do we ensure that they keep learning?
Falawe, I can maybe share a few thoughts on this. The first is that we can make up for lost teaching time, but we can't make up for the loss of life. And I think that there is some amount to which we have to accept that there will be a loss of teaching time, and we have to decide today how we are going to transform our schools when those students return, such that we accelerate the quality of the learning that takes place and ensure that they are able to catch up with their peers from more fortunate circumstances. And I'm convinced that that is possible. I have done quite a bit of work over the past few weeks with a school that is a primary school in a refugee camp in Uganda called Kaburwas Primary School. They serve a community that is largely illiterate and largely unbanked and lacks much of the technology that you have asked about, and also speaks many different languages at home, which makes it very, very hard to communicate, even if you had a radio, communicate in such a way that you could reach all students. What the team at the primary school sought to do is to make sure that, one, they are identifying people in families that they can reach out to such that they can serve as teachers. Two, that they're giving their primary school students simple activities and tasks that they can do for an hour each day that keep them focused on basic literacy and numeracy things. And three, connecting with their teachers to rethink how much time they're going to spend in school and how they're going to use that time in school when they return, and rethink that starting now such that those students are in a position to thrive when everyone returns. So we have to think about what assets, and this goes back to the design with empathy question, what assets do we have that allow us to reach those families? And secondly, what are we going to do when schools get back such that they can caught up? Because it's not a lost cause to lose a few months of school.
Wow, thank you so much, Chris, for sharing. I'll now like to invite Olufunke Oyetola to ask her question. We have about 5 minutes to go.
Yeah, thank you, Falawe.
You're welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Yes, mine is not a question, but it is a contribution. Hello?
Please go ahead. We're listening.
Yes, I just want to share the Lagos State experience with our participants. Immediately, the schools were shut in Lagos. The State Ministry of Education, in collaboration with television stations and radio stations, organized a daily lesson plan for our students. And basic subjects, according to the Nigerian curriculums, were taught. And there's the students, the response, the feedback was that it has been a tremendous and encouraging one. And again, we are still thinking of, again, presently, currently we have partnership with corporate organizations to give out device that is preloaded with the Nigerian curriculum to our students to cushion the effect of the COVID-19 on teaching and learning. I think other states in the country could learn a lot from Lagos State experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for making it brief. Thank you, and well done to Lagos State. I'll now take 3 more questions, and I'll invite Godwin Henry to ask his question. Godwin Henry, please.
Okay, I'm here. Good afternoon, everyone. Excellent presentation by all the speakers. Quickly, I'll be directing I had 2 questions, but I'll limit to 1 because of the time. And it's to be directed at Dr. Mo. So I'm quite interested in the data part she spoke about, the need for us to prefer solution to the issues. We need accurate data. However, we cannot discount the environment we operate and find ourselves in. The data crisis is widespread. It's not just in education. We can see with the palliatives and other initiatives coming up, the issue with data and how to distribute it. And also we are having a lot of competition as against collaboration by different stakeholders. That means we are having different vested interests, even with the data. So right now, my question, what I would like to learn from Dr. Mo is, as stakeholders, as individuals who are concerned, how do we bring everyone to the same table speaking with one voice? Because if we all have different data, speaking different languages because of our different vested interests, people won't take us serious and education would still continue suffering. Today is COVID, tomorrow it will definitely be another issue. I'm aware of what...
Godwin, I think she's gotten your question now, so I'll just I'll let her answer now. And Dr. Mo, if you could.
Great, thank you, Godwin Henry, for that question. I think that it's definitely a very important point that you're making. I think it's only responsible to draw attention to the fact that we do have a National Bureau of Statistics, which is responsible and is the custodian for national level data in the country. And I think that we need to continue to support the work that they do and to ensure that we are cooperative, in the way that we can. I think that they have shown themselves to be very, quite a reliable, agency when it comes to production national level data. When it comes to data at lower levels, this is when we need to, again, think about where the reliable entities are that are able to provide us with data that is meaningful and data that is accurate to the degree that is possible for data to be accurate. When you talk about us coming together under one umbrella, I would say that there are quite a number of initiatives that position themselves as umbrella initiatives, especially within the private sector. And this really is like a challenge to them to rise up at this time. There are a lot of collaboratives, there are a lot of SDG groups, etc. And this is the time for, I think, for them to stand up and be counted in terms of how they aggregate data, in terms of how they disseminate that information and help people to work with some evidence.
It's time for us to all stand up and be counted for. I hope that answered your question, Godwin. I'm now going to ask Teachers Academy Africa to ask his question. We can't hear you. Okay. I'm not sure his microphone is working properly. So I'm going to ask Lydia Onoha to please ask her question or make her comment. Please make it as brief as possible.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Lydia Onoha, working with the USAID funded Northern Education Initiative Plus project. It's been nice being part of this webinar discussion. My concern has to do with parents, engaging parents. How practically can parents be engaged? How practically can we involve parents to help their children, to help support their children learning this?
Thank you so much, Lydia, for that question. And I'm going to ask, I wonder, thank you. I'm going to ask Papa Zingai to answer this question. How do we engage parents in a time like this to support the learning of their children?
Well, first of all, a little advertisement. I liked very much what my brother from another mother, Chris, said about these examples from Africa. I want to give one example from Africa that I think is very important, because I think one of the tragedies of Africa is that we don't share many best practices that are abound in the continent. There's a program in Ethiopia and Liberia run by a couple of organizations called Second Chance. And I had the opportunity to spend a day visiting schools of this second chance. Basically, what they do is that they take students that are aged between 9 and 14 who have never been in school. And they train teachers in a special way. And in 10 months, these kids cover the first 3 years of education. I know this sounds shocking, but I've seen it in practice. And then they are reintegrated into the system. This is so powerful. If you just think about it, the African students we could educate through such practices. And when you talk about 13 million Nigerian students who are out of school, without innovations like this, how are we going to reach those out of school children? To the issue of parents, one of the interesting experiences I've had as Minister of Education was that for a child or for a policy to work, it must be understood by parents, by the ministry, from the minister to the minister officials, and by the students themselves. There's this triangle of forces. If you communicate the same message in the school, in the public, and at home, it's likely to take hold. The problem is that education is not the monopoly of teachers, or the monopoly of parents, or the monopoly of the Minister of Education. It is the responsibility of everybody. We all have a responsibility to bring up all our children. We have moved a lot as Africans from our traditional way of educating children to this approach where there is specialization. In the past, in the true African tradition, there was no distinction between knowledge, between skills, and between values. And society as a whole was engaged in upbringing of children, bearing in mind that those 3 pillars of the triangle were equal. It was a trinity of forces: knowledge, skill, and value. And these are communicated both in school and certainly at home. Therefore, I don't think you can have a good education system which does not consider the role of parents.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. And just before I move on to the next speaker, I just want you to share your last words and your last thoughts. And we're now wrapping up this discussion. I can't believe it's almost 2 hours since we started this conversation today. And so I'd like you, Papa, to share in 30 seconds, what are you leaving with us as we wrap up this conversation?
I often got depressed in the past because Africa's economy was going in the wrong direction. But through meeting people like Chris 2 years ago in Nairobi, and a group of young people, just like we have met them today, I have hope in Africa. My parting words are the following. We, the older generation, we liberated Africa from colonialism. Your job today as the youth of Africa is to emancipate Africa economically. Your job is to emancipate Africa economically. We emancipated colonialism. Your job is to emancipate Africa economically.
Wow, powerful. Thank you very much. And straight to Dr. Modupe Adefeso, please share your parting words.
Great, thank you. It's been an amazing conversation, and it's just been wonderful, to hear what everyone has to say about this, educating, children in these times that we live in. Two things. One is that I charge governments to continue to communicate and to, I love that Chris used that term. I think that it's really applicable to governments as well at this point in time, so that people know that you care about them and people understand that you may not have all the answers, but you do care about the citizens. That's the first thing. The second is, call me a hopeless optimist, but I do believe that this pandemic gives us an opportunity to reset education in Africa. It gives us an opportunity to think about how we can leapfrog using different kinds of technologies, whether they're high-tech or they're low-tech. And I think that the differentiator
Oh, so sad. I think we lost Dr. Mo. I'll now like to call on Simi Unwogugu to please share her parting words with us.
Thank you, Folawe. I will finish, I think, most thoughts which really gel with mine. I think that we need to look at the positives side of the pandemic and what it has really highlighted to us that we need to do urgently in terms of moving very quickly beyond traditional models of education to alternative models that measure learning, measure results, and really prepare our students for a practical future, a successful future. I've really learned from my colleagues, my fellow panelists, and Chris. It's always great to hear and learn from you. I think what I'm taking away is that, from Chris and some of the others, is that excellence is something that we must continually pursue in whatever form. And I think that it's obvious that government will not be able to do it alone. So we will need collaboration with NGOs and corporations. I think that what will really work is when we all remove our own personal agendas and really work together to say, how do we push our children to the forefront? I think the fact that we have lower cases of the incidence of the disease gives us an opportunity to really look at how we can ride the wave of the COVID-19 for positive outcomes. I think that there will be a lot of change in the way that schools are constructed. There will be a lot of change in the way that children learn. And so we really need to use this period of this lockdown to say, how do we change things for good? Not just for the lockdown, but for good, so that our students are on par with the rest of the world.
Thank you very much. And we lost Dr. Mo, but she sent in her last word here, and I'm just going to quickly read it. And she says, strategy and speed will differentiate those who are able to leapfrog educational access and quality post-pandemic, hopefully we all can apply these principles, whether we are government or non-state organizations. Thank you, Teach for Nigeria, she says. So Simi mentioned government. I think it's a good way to now invite Mrs. Shoyombo to share her parting words as we wrap up this conversation. Mrs. Shoyombo, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you so much to Teach for Nigeria, but at the same time, I'm so proud of what every state is doing at the moment, because apart from Lagos State, apart from Ogun State, quite a lot of states are doing a lot to bring in virtual learning. So we're so proud because now everybody is actually copying great things. So together, we must not see ourselves as competitors, but as complementers, because we all need to complement ourselves. The second thing I want to say is for private organizations, they must be looking at their resources on how they can support the government, but ensuring that it's something that can cater for, children in all areas, not just in the urban areas, but how children in the rural areas also catered for. So we need to always be conscious of that and to see how robust our resources can be to support education. Thank you.
Thank you. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you to you, Falawe, for bringing this group of people together. Many of my favorite people in education in Africa and indeed globally are on this call, either as panelists or as observers, and it's a privilege to be here. I think my most important final thought would be that constraint is the mother of innovation, right? When we it is through facing new constraints that we actually must create new and better ways to do things. I think we tend to think about education in schools in very static ways. The exams we must pass, the curriculum that we must cover in year 1 or in year 2 or in year 3. As Ngai has just told us, at Second Chance, you do 3 years of school in 10 months. I think that we have heard in Lagos about the work that happens in the radio. We see so many new innovations coming in that are much needed in education in Africa as a result of this unparalleled situation that we face. I encourage all of us to lean into it and to collaborate with each other and exchange ideas. And I stand ready to do that and look forward to doing that with anyone who feels that I could be of support. I'm confident that all children will be better off actually as a result of the innovation that emerges from this time, even though it is a period of deep uncertainty at the present.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. And I'm going to take you up on that commitment. So I see that Mr. Bankolemo is back on, and I'll just quickly like to invite him to share his last thoughts before we finally close this conversation. Over to you, Mr. Bankolemo, if you're there and if you can hear me.
When things like this happen, we dig deep. I'm confident that we'll have to work together. Strong collaborations between the government and private sector is the way forward. As a government, definitely going to come up with a clear plan for education post-COVID-19. The reality is that nobody thought of this kind of a challenge. So what will education look like in Nigeria post-COVID-19? The challenges we had before that we planned for, or the work plan we had for education in the country, is totally different now based on what has happened now, But I'm confident that what government needs to do is to lead, come up with a big vision, reach out to private sector, collaborate, and we'll solve the big problems, That's what we're going to do. For me, it's something we're already working on. I'm confident we'll turn these things around by the grace of God. We will.
Thank you very much. But I'm sorry, but I want to just ask you one question that you missed we lost you. But it was around connecting. It was around electricity. And someone wanted to know if government is doing anything in particular to ensure that we have power across the country.
I mean, government is doing something to ensure we have power across the country. You see, I mean, I think sometimes we just, the power problem is something we're working on, but it's not a switch they're going to flip and it will be all solved immediately. No, it's a continuous thing. We will try and engage our problem in spite of the challenges we have. So yes, we're committed to improving the power supply across the country, but the reality is that solutions will be thrown up, solutions that will engage, we would have to be relevant to the things we have on ground today. So yeah, I wouldn't tell you that yes, there is 24 hours light in the country moving forward because post-COVID-19, that's not the truth. But the reality is that we are engaging it. And as stakeholders and as leaders, our solutions will engage the relevant problems we have on ground as a country today.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our participants. Thank you to our speakers who have participated in this. I think my biggest takeaway from this is just just hearing everybody talk about the need to collaborate, the need to work together. And I think this time and this period has brought that, reality for us to really stand up and put ourselves forward and continue to work together to ensure that all our children continue to learn and that we readjust and reimagine and rethink our education beyond COVID-19. On that note, I'll now like to welcome Bongai Yahunze, who is the head of Africa for Teach for All, to give a closing, and then we'll then be closing this conversation. Bongai, please unmute your microphone.
Okay. Oh, thank you for Lawe and all the speakers today. As I was just listening, I feel, I feel so bloated with so many good ideas. And I thought one thing that stood out when everybody was sharing is about right now, this is our opportunity, as Africa, as Nigeria, to just reimagine what is possible. I love what I think Dr. Mo said, love and speed, loving strategy and speed will help us navigate this. And two things that also stood out for me, there was a lot. One was the role of collective leadership, that each of us, we have a part to play. I think at one point there were 300 people on this call. And I was thinking, if each of the 300 do something going forward, imagine what will be possible. And I was so humbled and touched with the example that Chris gave on how an 18-year-old who was in isolation and had everything else that they could have had the opportunity to mourn and think about what's not happening, actually took the opportunity to think beyond outside the box and help others. So I really liked that. And I also loved what Zinga shared around the role of the community, that, most of the people on this call, in particular fellows and everybody else, we live in communities and rather than maybe people coming from the outside, this is a chance for communities to come together, like what Zingai talked about around beating that snake and just tackling all this stuff, what's going on. Then one last thing that I would share is what Dr. Mo also shared around looking beyond data, because it's very easy to come up with solution that addresses symptoms rather than the root cause. So one thing that I would like to call out on behalf of us, as a continent, it's about how do we take this opportunity to really understand some of the root causes of the inequalities that now have been perpetuated by this COVID, but also getting so excited about, yes, it's unsettling, yes, we don't have the solutions, but actually, yes, by thinking outside the box, we know anything is possible. But again, I also want to thank Folawe for bringing so many, people together, and I always feel so inspired by the work that you and the team and the board of Teach for Nigeria are doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of my colleagues who have made this possible, Teach for Nigeria fellows. And lastly, I just want to use this opportunity to say a big thank you to Profuturo. I don't know that they're here, but then this is the first time that we're announcing and sharing a partnership that we're going into with Profuturo Foundation. And we're launching a program in partnership with MPZ po Educat, which is Teach for Spain, Teach for Liberia, and Teach for Tanzania, to train in educational competency, 15,000 teachers together. Profuturo is a Spanish digital education institution, and it's founded by Telefonica Foundation and La Cax Foundation to narrow the education gap. I'm particularly inspired by this example of support, because in a time like this, a lot of the donors and funders are pulling out funding and not really thinking about how to support, but they are looking at how to scale digital skills and literacy across as many teachers as possible in Africa. So thank you, Profuturo, and thank you again to each one of you for joining this call. Have a wonderful weekend and goodbye.